Hello students, this is Alan Boris speaking to you from my office here at the Anthropology Lab at Kenai Peninsula College. This lecture will be an introduction to the Dena'ina language. There will be two accompanying lectures with this, one on the sound system and one on the grammar. And the grammar will focus on the concept of language and thought. And in this one, we'll give an overview of the Dena'ina language and different perspectives that will help you understand the culture. And we can make that point with the first slide. This is Franz Boas as a young man. For you anthropology fans, anthropology students, you know this name. Considered to be the father of American anthropology. Back at the turn of the century, starting the first anthropology department in North America at Columbia University. One of the principles of Boas was this, that to understand a culture, you've got to understand the language. And this is why we're doing what we're doing here. Not that we will learn everything there is about Dena'ina language, but for you students, you will get an introduction to the culture by an introduction to the language. This squares with an indigenous view that language is fundamental to identity. A couple of quotes that illustrate this for the Sami, the people of northern Norway, Sweden, Finland, parts of Russia. Israel Ruong has said, language is the map of Sami reality. Benally and Veery have written for the Navajo, the Dene of the American Southwest. Quote, language is a social construct. It is a blueprint for thought, behavior, and social and cultural interaction and self-expression. The great Kiowa writer N. Scott Momaday has said, language and the sacred are indivisible. The earth and all its appearances and expressions exist in names and stories and prayers and spells. And closer to home, Dena'ina elder Claire Swan has written and said, when they took away our language, they took away our ability to think in our own way. And we will return to that specific concept in the lecture on grammar, which will really focus on the relationship between language and culture, language and thought. But for now, we're sort of setting the stage for how important language is in understanding culture and being a part of culture. It's important to again return to a point of view that of different questions, because there is and can be misunderstanding. Culture bearers, Dena'ina, people, see language as a vehicle of identity, as it should be. Linguists are trained, on the other hand, to analyze and understand the structure of language. So culture bearers and linguists have a slightly different point of view. Anthropologists, as we said in one of the beginning lectures, again have their point of view. Why is the culture organized the way it is? How is it structured? So linguists are looking at the structure of language, anthropologists are looking at the structure of culture, and culture bearers are concerned with values and identity. I hope that in some way a true understanding of this will come from this intersection of these 3 points of view. They need not be exclusive, but anthropologists, linguists need to understand that their view is not the only view. This intersection is what we strive for and to whatever small extent we'll achieve that in this lecture, we'll have gained ground. So this map you've seen before. It's a map of territory, but it's also a map of language, the Great Northern Dene territories. And we describe the territorial significance of going from east to west. But these are also the languages of the north, of the Athabascan or Dene, northern Athabascan territories. And there are also the Southwest Dene, the Apache, the Lipan, the Navajo, and the Pacific Coast Dene, the Hupa and other tribes up here in Northern California, and reaching a little bit into southern Oregon. The languages in Alaska, apologize for the fuzzy version. I lifted this off of the Alaska Native Language Center website and didn't do a very good job of getting the good clear version. This is the new version, and of course Dena'ina is this language right in here, and they've adjusted the boundaries a little bit to better reflect Dena'ina territory. Actually, I had to pushed it down just a little bit down into this area, based on Dena'ina sites on the Mulchatna River, but nevertheless this is a very accurate rendition of Dena'ina territory. This map is based on similarities between the languages, so the colors are carefully chosen to reflect the degree of similarity or dissimilarity between the languages. The blue and green are Eskimo Aleut languages, and that reflects an entirely different language family than the Dene or Athabascan languages, which are in the reddish hues here. So to the extent you see color similarities, you will see they are a reflection of differences. Dena'ina, for example, is quite different from Gwich'in or Han. For one reason, Han and Gwich'in are tonal languages. They have a quality of tonality. Does it go up or does it go down? Which Dena'ina does not have and Atna does not have. So the key, I guess, is the litmus test is mutual intelligibility. And the lines are drawn based more or less on the ability to understand one another. Dena'ina and Daghatan are very close in this chart, meaning a very similar degree of similarity. Dena'ina and Atna are fairly close, reflecting a similar degree of similarity. But they're entirely different from the different language family of the Eskimo Aleut. Doesn't mean there aren't words that have been borrowed, but the structure of the language is different. So this is a chart of those Dene or Na-Dene, if you to the broader concept, or Athabascan. Na-Dene is the more appropriate term. And this chart also reflects historical aspects. So the more distant the languages are, the more distant the more time has lapsed since they have split. So we can assume a core Na-Dene, and the first split was Haida. And that's only recently been really affirmed that Haida is part of this Na-Dene, and continuing work will I'm sure be going on this, leaving a Proto-Tlingit Athabascan Eyak language, from which at one point in time Tlingit split. So there are similarities in the sound system, for example, between Tlingit and say Dena'ina. And time goes on, and they're leaving a Proto-Athabascan Eyak, and at some point Eyak splits off. leaving Proto-Athabascan. So proto meaning an earlier core language, sort of a precursor to these. And that splits at a certain point in time. The Apachean group here, Navajo, Apache, Lipan, Kiowa, and the Pacific Coast, not necessarily splitting in this order, but the California and Southern Oregon, Northern California, Southern Oregon groups, but the core being the northern groups here, with the map we just saw with the Alaskan and Northern Canada Athabascan speakers. And here's Dena'ina highlighted here. So these are relationships among languages. This relationship reflects historical movements. There are ways to try to tease out when these happened based on rates of language change, and we'll touch on that a little bit later in this lecture. We can add another language to this as far as a language family, and that's the language of Ket. So Ket is an isolated language here in the Yenisei River area of Siberia. And based on work, and here's the local variation of it here, based on the work by Edward Vaida, among other Russian linguists, but for the United States and Canada, Edward Vaida, a linguist at Western Washington University, has been traveling to that area and has established fairly firmly, I think, that the structure of Ket is similar to the Dene or Na-Dene Athabascan languages of North America, primarily in looking at the verb structure. So it has a similar structure where there's a stem and prefixes, as will be described in the lecture on grammar. So this is a great, important find, and it was not just done overnight. He's been working on this for years. And Jim Carey and he organized a set of symposia, mostly at UEF in Fairbanks, to explore the significance of this. But the short version of it, either this is sort of a Athabascan Dene homeland, and this reflects a remnant group that were left behind, I guess you would say, as others moved to Alaska and into Canada. But we can't tell from the language that maybe the movement was actually the other way. In other words, there was a group that moved back from Alaska, from the north, crossed the Bering Land Bridge, and became established here in this part of Siberia. I think it's most likely, almost certainly likely, that this is some remnant group, or they may have moved here from a core area. That's possible as well. Nevertheless, I think it's going to be generally accepted that Ket reflects a remnant isolate that were part of an earlier movement of peoples into Alaska, northern Canada. Ket, a Yeniseian language. This is from the Alaska Native Language Center and sort of describes the same thing that I described in that earlier chart. You can pull this up off of the Alaska Native Language Center website. I believe I got that from there. And here's Dena'ina. Here's their spelling with a T right here, showing that relationship. Tsimshian is actually, part of this system. So languages are mutually intelligible, and we've talked about this. So by definition, an Atna speaker should not readily be able to understand a Dena'ina speaker. But it's important to point out the difference is one of gradation because of the way we make maps. There's hard and fast lines, as though, you step 100 feet from one side to the other and all of a sudden different language. In fact, there's probably one of gradation from a core area to another core area, and there was a lot of overlap. Dena'ina for it does include some Alutiiq or Sugpiaq words, Agutig, person same as me, Gashak. These are Alutiiq words or Sugpiaq words. There's Russian words, and of course English loan words in Dena'ina. So the language does reflect this evolution, but there are relatively few, actually, loan words in Dena'ina, probably because of the structure of Dena'ina, particularly the structure of the verb. The verb does not lend itself to borrowing words very easily. This then is Dena'ina territory in terms of the dialects of Dena'ina territory. So there is the Upper Inlet dialect. This is set in a river area. It is closely related to Atna. Obviously there's movement here, and there's movement up here relatively easily between the two areas. The inland dialect then occurs in this area, the primary villages being Nundalton, which is down here, and Lime Village, which is up in this area on the Stony River. Today, of course, in earlier times there were many smaller villages. The Iliamna dialect is primarily in the upper Iliamna Lake area. I think I probably should have drawn that more like so. And the Seldovia dialect was spoken in Seldovia and the far side of Kachemak Bay. And then the outer inlet dialect of the Kenai Peninsula and the west side of Cook Inlet. So these are the dialects as of today. There are no speakers of the Seldovia dialect. There are no speakers of the outer inlet dialect. These are extinct dialects. The upper inlet, I don't know. I think there's only a few. Most notable being Sabastapan, and he's certainly in his 90s, if not older now. Walter Johnson, I believe, is the last remaining speaker of the Iliamna dialect, and there are probably about 30 or so speakers of the inland dialect in Nundalton and out of Lime Village. So it is definitely a language that is threatened. We know that indigenous languages are becoming extinct at a very rapid rate, and we're, as we'll talk about in this lecture later, talk about efforts to revitalize the Dena'ina language. The dialects then, the same map here. A dialect is defined as mutually intelligible between groups of speakers but show pattern variation. Just as somebody speaking a New England dialect of English can understand someone speaking a Texas drawl or a Midwest twang, but we can document the patterned variation between them. So for Dena'ina, it can be sound variation, and that's the one we most commonly associate with dialect differences. For example, in outer inlet dialect, in Kenai here, Bajuk is how you say caribou, but in the inland area, Vajuk. So generally speaking, what is an initial B in the outer inlet dialect will be an initial V in the inland dialect. That's a pattern. It's not random. It shows a pattern, and so that variation occurs. Why these variations emerge? hard to say. A lot of ink has been written about it for just languages in general, but languages do reflect identity, and this might be one thing that reflects the identity of the two parts of Dena'ina territory. That's just one example. There are many. There's also lexical variation. Outer Inlet uses Dena'ina for animal, whereas inland dialect uses gaga. The same word for brown bear is also the word for animal, or mammal at least. So Dena'ina, gaga, these are two variations, and that's at a lexical level, meaning a word level. So sound variation, lexical level. There also is grammatical variation. When you view the lecture on grammar, you will learn that the verb consists of a stem and a number of prefixes. Not all of these prefixes, but a number of these prefixes, usually 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 of these prefixes, which come in a very specific order and are morphemes. That is, they're not whole words, but they're parts of words. They're a morpheme. And for all of the dialects, it's very specific. In Kenai dialect, however, these two positions, the inceptive position, I will begin to, right here, and the noun gender position, which we'll discuss in the grammar lecture, are reversed. So in the inland dialect, for example, it would go from negative to noun gender to inceptive, whereas in the Kenai dialect it goes inceptive, noun gender, and so on. And that's a big deal. That's that's when you have that level of variation, that means a significant separation in ways of speaking. That, however, once you know that, if you were an inland speaker versus an outer inlet speaker, you would be able to understand each other without any difficulty. You would just know very definitely where that person's from. So dialects. So dialects are different from languages. Dialects mean there is mutual intelligibility, just pattern variation. So language use and language loss, and we have to talk about this very tragic story of language loss that has brought us to the point where Dena'ina is one of the world's most endangered languages. We could say that at the turn of the century that Dena'ina were fluent in Dena'ina, and very often in Russian, English, and often Norwegian or Swedish or Finnish. But by 1970 or so, there were only about 5 speakers of the Kenai dialect and about 120 total speakers, whereas today there's about 40 speakers, give or take, and they're all over 60, all over the mid-60s. So we're going to try to talk about how we got to that point. To go back to the first point here about being multilingual, this is Sergei Kwasnikov in Nanwalik. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So Sergei spoke Dena'ina. He spoke Russian. He spoke English. And he spoke Norwegian. And he spoke Sugpiaq. He spoke 5 languages. And I know, I can verify that. I was in Nanwalik with some Russian archaeologists a number of years ago, and we were sitting waiting for the plane in the village center, and I was sitting with these Russians, and Sergei walks in and says a phrase in Russian. I think he probably knew the Russians were there, and they struck up a conversation. And then I didn't know Russian, but I introduced myself, and we talked, and I spoke a little Norwegian to him, and of course he knew that, and a few words in Dena'ina, he knew that, and of course he knew English, and I'm just going to take his word for it that he spoke Sigpiaq as well. So he's one of the last of a long line of Dena'ina who were multilingual. Generally speaking, however, it didn't go the other way. Russians did not learn Dena'ina. No English, very few English speakers learned Dena'ina. Maybe none, maybe a few words, but not many. The Scandinavians that were here did not learn Dena'ina, and so Dena'ina has become this language on the verge of extinction. And a number of major events contributed to this. This is the smallpox epidemic, the horrific smallpox epidemic between 1838 and 1841. This is actual data. This chart, this line here, is from Fedorov's documentation of language, of population, pardon me. And here's that horrific epidemic drop right here. A little bit of rebound, and then again dropping. This is probably reflecting a series of epidemics. And this then is the Russian, and this is Creole. Creole would be part Dena'ina, part Russian, but also baptized in the church as a special designation the Russians used, and we tend not to use that today. Nevertheless, this had a huge impact on the people, and there was at the same time and in the church documents a conversion to Orthodoxy. This reflecting Orthodoxy. This is a icon in the Kenai Church. On the back of it is written the date 1797. This is a standard icon. This is Our Lady of Kazan. She also has trade beads that have been put into her, I'm not sure what they would call this, but this headdress type thing here. So there was a significant conversion to Orthodoxy. Whether it was a whole-scale conversion, as sometimes is implied by missionization, or rather an adoption of certain concepts of Orthodoxy. When we talk about religion, I will make the point that it probably was the latter. That is, a lot of Dena'ina concepts were embedded in Orthodoxy and vice versa, such that it was, Aaron Leggett and I have used the term indigenized Orthodoxy, and Catherine Knott and I in another publication have used the term indigenized Orthodoxy. But one of the things that was adopted by Dena'ina, in part by the smallpox epidemic, was the concept that things happen because of God's will. And I think it was triggered by the smallpox epidemic. In traditional Dena'ina spirituality, things happened because of what somebody said, what somebody did, or even what somebody thought. Thoughts could trigger actions. And that idea would have produced, that concept would have produced huge guilt in terms of this event, because maybe it's something somebody said, somebody thought, maybe something somebody did. But Orthodoxy preaches the message that things happen because of God's will. And so that led to a lot of the conversion and adoption of that concept. The point for us here is that Church Slavonic became a language, I should have said not the language, but a language of spirituality. One inroad into Dena'ina language. Another one was the coming in 1882. I should have put that date on here. 1882 of canneries. The upper left is the first cannery in Cook Inlet, the second cannery in Alaska, at the mouth of the Kasilof River. You can still see the remains of some of this cannery. Just was skiing by there the other day, and you could still see where the nets were hung to dry. That brought a lot of people in, and we will talk about the significance of the canneries coming to Cook Inlet. Here's this says Cook Inlet salmon on this box, so that box is being shipped out. So new people come in. The point I wish to make here is that English becomes the language of the workplace. So if you wanted to work, if you're Dena'ina and you wanted to work, then you needed to speak English. I counted 17 languages that would have been spoken in Kenai in 1900, going by the census and the place of origin of people. So it was a very eclectic place. There were Norwegians and Finns and Swedes and Germans and, of course, Americans and a lot of Italians and others from Chinese workers. But the common language of the workplace was English, and so there would have been impetus for Dena'ina to learn English. Canneries didn't happen in the inland area, and they didn't happen in the Iliamna area. So consequently, the language change, the forces of language change, were not as great in that area, and that's why today we have more speakers from the Nundalton area, for example, than Kenai, because of the cannery influence. That led to, and we'll return to this point, the Dena'ina in the Kenai area becoming second, maybe even third-class citizens. So here's H.M. Weatherby, who was the cannery superintendent. He represents the emerging social order, the top of the emerging social order in the late 18 and early 1900s in the Kenai area. He was the manager of the Kasilof cannery and also was an Alaska Commercial Company agent. A lot of men came. This is Andrew Berg, who was a Swedish-speaking Finn. There's a part of Finland that was Swedish-speaking, and Andrew Berg represents people who came, and they were people of a lot of talent. They could work in the lumber. They could be miners. They could do a lot of things. In his particular case, he never married and never really contributed to the community, but becomes that second tier. And I take this man to be European origin, American, maybe Scandinavian, married into Dena'ina, and stayed. I don't know who this is, but this becomes then the second tier of, here's one, here's two, and this picture becomes the third level. Okay, I can't do three very well here. And if you look at the eyes are not welcoming. And that's because this man, Weatherby, took this picture. And the Dena'ina were in the process of becoming third-class citizens in their homeland. And language, part of that had to do with language, forces of language change. But the worst, maybe, was the U.S. policy, Indian assimilation policy that was in operation between 1887 and 1934 and continued on until statehood in Alaska. Sheldon Jackson was appointed General Agent of Education. So here's Jackson's statement on language. It is the purpose of the government in establishing schools in Alaska to train up English-speaking American citizens. You will therefore teach in English and give special prominence to instruction in the English language. Your teaching should be pervaded by a spirit of the Bible. So language extinction was practiced. Schools were English only, and children were punished for speaking their native language, and it seemed to have been particularly harsh in Kenai. This is a school in the 1930s. This is the Kenai Territorial School. So these would have been the children who would have been punished for speaking Dena'ina in school. The punishment consisted of, for girls with dresses, being forced to kneel on rock salt, sharp little pebbles of salt, if they spoke Dena'ina. They or the boys would have had their mouths washed out with soap if they spoke Dena'ina. When I first came to this area over 40 years ago, one of the first things Dena'ina people would tell me, usually quite quietly and usually very personally, you know, they used to wash our mouths out with soap for speaking our language. I know Dena'ina who would not walk down the soap aisle of the store because of the bad memory of having their mouth washed out with soap for speaking their native language. Peter Kalifornsky, who we will talk about quite a bit with language revitalization, who later became one of the great indigenous writers of the United States. When he was in the 3rd grade, Mr. Bachman beat him with a stick for speaking Dena'ina. Beat him so badly that he could not walk for 3 days. His legs swole up so that he couldn't get his pants on, he told me. This punishment, by today's standards, is unconscionable. But it was the policy of assimilation, forced assimilation policy. Language genocide led the thinking of the time to an Americanization, and really had the effect of having a devastating effect on identity. A horrific act for which the American education system, to my knowledge, has never apologized for. I believe they have in Canada, but not here. So that was a factor in language change. And there are people today who deny any knowledge of Dena'ina, although I know they were exposed to it as children. And we could say another factor was then this chart. This is for the Kenai Peninsula, but we could do a similar one for the Mat-Su area, and was the growth starting in the 60s and accelerating in the 70s and 80s, this almost exponential population growth triggered by homesteading, then oil, and then all the associated economic activity, leading to, so here's some early pictures. This is the Matanuska Valley, Dena'ina territory. This is early Soldotna. This is downtown Anchorage, I forget when that picture was taken. But the growth of non-native people within Dena'ina territory, and English, of course, being the language of that experience. So all of these factors led to Dena'ina becoming now almost an extinct language. So let's talk about language revitalization. Fortunately for this area, James Carey came here in the early 1970s, pardon me, and has done magnificent work in language documentation, language structure, recording stories, and here he is in the anthropology lab. We're looking at, I forget what we're looking at there, but I've known him for all of those years, and I can't say enough about the work he's done and others. Joan Tenenbaum did a great book, dissertation, really, PhD dissertation on the structure of the Dena'ina verb, and others have worked on the language as well. And of course, we owe great thanks to the people they worked with, the indigenous, the Dena'ina, who took the time to work with linguists. Here's Peter Kalifornsky, Shempete. Here's some more. Anton Ivan, Fedosia Sokolov, Walter Johnson and Annie Johnson. There's Pete Bobby, Andrew Beluda. All of these took time to work with linguists to record stories, to document language. And we owe a wonderful we have a wonderful indebtedness to these people, these elders who recognized that the language is identity. And even though it's second best to record the stories, to put the information into books is a legacy that, in its own way, will allow the language to continue on. And I should emphasize that these are not all of the people involved, but these are some of the major figures in elders that have been involved in this. So there have been classes here at Kenai Peninsula College. This is the first class that Peter Kalifornsky and I taught here at Kenai Peninsula College in 1982. And some of the students and Danita Peter has also taught classes. Here she's shown with Joan Tenenbaum. And there have been classes at Kenai Peninsula College, at the Comanche Indian Tribe. Now there are classes. I'll show you some other pictures of classes up at the Language Center, UAA, last semester. This is spring of 2013, but Marilyn Beluda taught a class in Dena'ina at UAA last semester. All of these are important in trying to resurrect the language. Here's one of the first classes. This is Peter Kalifornsky. He's showing Sandra Stewart Shaganoff how to make a sound, and that's their father Targonsky in the background. So this is sort of an interesting photo. Here's a class that was done in the spring of 2012 at Kenai Peninsula College, focusing on reading and writing. And here's Dana Verhoeven. She's from the Netherlands, never been to Alaska, and she wrote a story. I'm going to play this YouTube clip to let you hear. It's a short YouTube clip, but you can go to it yourself. There's a whole set of these of the students. We just kind of set up a camera and let them talk. But she's going to say, in August I came to the Kenai Peninsula. I fished for silver salmon on the Kenai River. I learned about the Dena'ina language. I saw breakup. And I will go, meaning I will go home, with happiness and sadness. And here's her Dena'ina version of it. Let's see if we can get this to play here.
My name is Dana Verkozen. I'm an exchange student from the Netherlands, and I never came in contact with Dena'ina before this class. I took this class because I really wanted to learn something more about the natives in this area, and I'm really enjoying this class. Now it's coming. Okay. Chuchuk du a benen ke enen di ter yarenener eshu. Katnu at nadlariku ezel an. Dena'ina tizaldin tuntat un iesh an. Chu nuro chu cheerden eich treshu, which means my story. In August, I came to the Kenai Peninsula. I fished silver salmon on the Kenai River. I learned about Dena'ina. I saw breakup, and I will go with happiness and sadness.
Oh.
And if you put it in Dena'ina sentence structure, it is: in August, this part, to the Kenai Peninsula I came. On the Kenai River on, for silver salmon, I fished. Dena'ina, about, I learned. Here. Breakup, I saw. And happiness and sadness with I will go. That's my story.
Well, that was charming, Dana. And I cut it off too early when I posted that, because there was a nice round of applause. But there were some wonderful stories written from that, original stories. This is not just copying stuff. So people were learning the structure of the verb and putting it in. Another little, just a lot of different exercises we've done. Here's some of you will recognize Dr. Seuss here, but here's Dr. Seuss in Dena'ina. One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. Selska hi sluka, nuti ha sluka, de geldeki sluka, de ditchadi sluka. One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. So these are exercises that are fun to do because they're sort of challenging, but we can learn the structure of Dena'ina by doing these types of translations. This is a recent class. This is in January of 2013. This is Marilyn Beluda. She's back here. First day of class in Tyonek. And this, she'd already done a class for adults, and this is her class that the Dena'ina Foundation sponsors for the children of Tyonek, and we wish her great luck in doing this. So there are a lot of different places that classes are being offered and classes are being done, and under course materials there are some of the great YouTubes that have been done on Dena'ina language, all focusing on revitalizing the language. So, in addition to the classes, this I want to tell you a little bit about Peter Kalifornsky and the work on his book. So Peter he died in 1993, but became one of the preeminent writers in an indigenous language. I'm going to kind of flip to the next slide. This is some of his writings. So he wrote in Dena'ina, and then he would do a translation in English, a rough translation, and here we are. working on that, working on those translations and the Dena'ina, editing it for his book, Dena'ina Legacy, Katalegi Suktu, Remaining Stories, the collected writings of Peter Kalifornsky, and you have that book in your on PDF format in your course materials. So here we are in the anthropology lab working on this book. It was 4 years in the making. I'm going to play just a little bit of one of the stories in the book, which I'm going to click on this, and we'll just hear a little bit of Peter reading the mouse story. And what you could do is pause it now and go to your book if you wanted, and kind of follow along. I'll just play part of it because it's pretty long, but you'll get to hear Peter. Now he's reading, he's not telling the story, but he's reading what he wrote.
Kasa Sukto mouse story. At the beginning. Sukalit sukotene enak relach. Taknultach. So tan ekchu. So suka okokalan tachnis is. Yak suka nakakalash. Tachnis is. Hayenis to kastalga. Stan kochtana yakhayuk. So skidatnik. Hayenis to kusta ko neinikasta. Yetchte sakwakane. Kalist hayuk. So kankwa itinalun. Yegatnak Sultan Ejane Resol. Yegane Shorohe Kwakisland Chu Chikanak Patudinzat. Na only Kisland Chu Yeti Ninyak Wakokteo. So Haye Nisto Nakitarikite Kwakosil. Teaching Chikanak Patudinzat. Yin Keshonan. Kasakwatan Ejane Resolan. On Kilinisto Titinio. Trelikanktazo. Yaho Rayus.
So, okay, so Helyush. He's talking about a man who's walking to the mountains, and he walked and he walked and he walked. So it's a man who is his village is starving, and he's walking without hope. He's walking, but he's walking to find an answer, and he helps a little mouse over a windfall. And in other words, he treats a humble little animal with respect. And he gets to the mountains and he encounters Gongta Jalen, the mother of everything, over and over, and her husband, Gujun. And together, because they sense that he has the right attitude, they give him a magic pack of food that he is to return to his village and sprinkle some down on that magic pack, and it will turn to a great quantity of food. The people who are starving survive, they gain strength, and they begin to hunt again. All because the man had the right attitude. So there's a wealth of wonderful insight into these stories about Dena'ina and attitudes toward nature and Dena'ina cosmology. And I just want to say how privileged I feel to have been able to help Peter with his book. This is the only picture of us working together, by the way, in 4 years, so I guess we locked the door and said, don't bother us. Along the way, Peter instructed me in a lot of things. And I want to play a short clip. I had an old Sony boombox recorder, and I would buy these cheap tapes and stick them in and just tape record the whole session. A lot of it was just mundane stuff, but occasionally it was some very important stuff. I wish I would have had a grant and could have had a formal recording of everything, because there's some wonderful information here. But there's about 50, 60 hours of tapes, and this is just a little excerpt of one of them.
Mouse story
Oops.
Now the gashak,
at the beginning.
did this have a form?
Mouse story.
Okay, sorry, I had a little technical difficulty there. Let's try this again.
Now the gashak, did this have a form? Could you draw a picture of a gashak? Could someone? Or was the gashak more something that existed but people couldn't see?
Well, there seems to be no picture of form in that line, except that he fast and pray and get right down to it, and he stayed with that praying until he started receiving that power, and he said something that will make his words come true.
So as I say, it goes on for, I don't know, a lot of hours, and I would just thank Peter for giving me some of those insights, and for taking the very difficult time. It was not easy producing this book, and he was, in the end, pleased. We were racing against time. The book came out in 1991, and within a year and a half he was sick in the hospital and would die within a short time. But this then became his legacy, and a Dena'ina legacy. Had people not taken the time, Peter, Shem Pete, Pete Bobby, the many Dena'ina elders who took the time to do this language work, we would be at a great loss. All of these will be recognized as some of the most important scholarly work of our time. So that's the writing, and we talked about this already, but much of these recordings that I made during that time, and of course many of the recordings that Jim Carrey made and others made, work their way into this website that we have gone to. Here's a couple of kids, Jerome and his buddy. This is over in Dalton. They're looking at that website and playing around, looking at the territory, making the words, and this, of course, is the future. This is how we're gonna. This is what people do now. So this is Peter's book. That's a great contribution. I just want to try to illustrate some of the other wonderful books, not all of them, that are available. Shem Pete's Alaska was a wonderful, wonderful book. Stories mostly derived from Shem Pete. And Jim Carrey and Jim Fall edited this book, and it's a great resource for the Upper Inlet. Jim Carrey's topical dictionary is remarkable. It's a noun dictionary primarily, but it has in one volume all of the dialects, all of the words, all of the nouns, and hopefully one day a draft of his verb dictionary will be brought to general use. That's Albert Wasserly's book. It's referred to as a junior dictionary that stems from 1979. It's still available. The thing about dictionaries, they never go out of date. A lot of smaller books. This is Tabona Eshnena, Tabona Land, and it's for the Tyonek area. It's a great resource. And there's, I don't know how many. I never counted them, but I bet there's 40 or 50 of these small little publications that were produced mostly by the Alaska Native Language Center. Here's another one, Dena'ina Language Lessons, and that has some lessons in it. Walter Johnson's wonderful I'll Tell You a Story, primarily for the Iliamna area. He grew up in Pedro Bay and spent time I think in Iliamna as well. At any rate, now lives in Homer, and with Jim Carey produced this remarkable book. Joan Tenenbaum, Dena'ina Suktua, Dena'ina Stories from the Nundalton area primarily. This again is a great resource and been reprinted, and if any of these books, if you can get them, they're worth having. Bilingual. Everything on this page is bilingual in Dena'ina and in English. Karen Ivanoff has done a beautifully illustrated book, Dena'ina Eshnena, Dena'ina Land, for the primarily in the inland dialect area, and the beautiful place name maps and stories in English mainly by the people of Dena'ina life. And that's pretty recent. I forget the date, 2007, I think. At any rate, that's available, and one that would be great to have on the shelf. Andrew Beluda, my stories, or my forefathers are still walking with me, and his great contribution to Dena'ina stories, and it too is bilingual. Like Walter's book, it has a CD with it, so that's a great source. And oops, I didn't mean to split off of that so fast. There's more. I didn't, there's only so many I can put on here. I think almost all of them are in your Dena'ina bibliography, but and a good place to find these is on the Alaska Native Language Center website. I think most of them are published there, or Lake Clark National Park. So, Dena'ina Language Institute, a number of these were held at Kenites Indian Tribe, that's KIT, here at the college, Alaska Native Heritage Center, out at Spirit Lake. So these are just some images from those Dena'ina Language Institutes where elders were brought together for language learning and practice and just attempts to keep the language going, and these have been wonderful. So I get to take the pictures. I'm just showing you some more pictures of these. Here's Helen Dick, and that's her here as well. She's here with her dad, Pete Bobby. There's Andrew Beluda, Gladys Ivanoff. General classroom scene. There's Walter Johnson, Danita Slauson. There's Jim Carey back there, and these were priceless. They should actually, the whole thing should have been tape recorded or video recorded. But this is all part of attempts to revitalize the language. Some more pictures. Some of the youngers, Aaron Leggett, Michelle Raven Moon, Shauna. These are all at Kenai Peninsula College. Gladys and Mary again. Here we went to California Village, and here I'm talking to this group from the Dena'ina Language Institute about events that happened at California Village. So that was a great revitalization program. And last slide, I know this has been long, but I just have to say this was one of the great teaching, learning experiences of my life. Here we are out at Spirit Lake, and we got the old style learning here going on. We got a blackboard and chalk. No internet, no blackboard, no new style blackboard, no, just the old way. And talking about language, and maybe the key thing is this fire pit right here. Gathered around the fire, everybody's got their coat on. It was kind of chilly, but talking about verbs, talking about the structure of the verb. And one of the great things that happened that night is I went back home, but people came, gathered around the fire pit again, and started writing verbs. And that's been the key for Dena'ina language learning, is understanding that verb. We wish that we could do language by immersion, but there are so few left. No one in the Kenai dialect, effectively no one in the other dialects except the inland dialect. And language by immersion puts huge pressure on the elders, because you have to take time out of your life to work with people. So we do the next best. We do it with the materials we have. And the materials are now, I think, there, that we can resurrect the language as a written and read language, and with efforts by other efforts, we can then convert into language, spoken language. And one day, Dena'ina will be taught in all the schools in Cook Inlet. I probably won't live to that day, but we have the materials to do that, and we can resurrect this language. And most important, what we can resurrect is the thoughts, ideas, cognition that is embedded in the language, because it is the language of the place. It's the language of Cook Inlet. It's the language where most of us live. And in that regard, we can't let it die. We will keep it going. So I thank all the Dena'ina elders and all the Dena'ina people who have shared the language and shared their concepts with us. And it has enriched my life, and hopefully will enrich yours as well.